Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips, with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. In this episode, I'm joined by Andrew G. Marshall. Andrew is a therapist with 40 years' experience helping couples communicate better. He's the author of the international bestseller, I Love You, But I'm Not in Love with You. And he's also the host of the award-nominated podcast, The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. We begin the episode looking at Andrew's motivations for becoming a therapist, following his personal experience of a family member's divorce when he was a child. Andrew explains the importance of communication, both during a relationship and after it ends. We role-play a typical scenario separating couples find themselves in and learn how to de-escalate emotive conversations. He gives some great tips on creating distance so you can respond rather than react. And we explore common mistakes people make when separating, including rushing the ending, seeing divorce as a magic bullet, and switching off pre-separation. We end the podcast by talking about Andrew's upcoming retreat and who it can help. This is a fantastic episode, whether you're in the midst of a separation or simply want to improve the health of your relationship. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Andrew.
It's my pleasure.
It's lovely to have you. Thank you for joining us. So just to set some context for today then, we're going to talk a little bit about common mistakes to avoid when separating. And you're going to give us some tips and hints on how to make sure that transition, if you've decided the relationship is over, is as smooth as possible. So I'm excited to hear that. But before we get into the meat of it, it would be really lovely, Andrew, if you could just tell us a bit about your background and what led you to specialise in relationships and particularly relationship breakdown.
Well, I think that we often discover the reason why we do things many years later. And so I will give you the answer that I now have after 40 years rather than the one I went into it with. But I witnessed a very nasty divorce. A very nasty divorce indeed, when I was very small. What you have to understand is that my mother's sister married my father's brother. So
Okay.
we're doubly connected.
Yes.
So whereas in most families, when you split up, you take the side or you stay with your own family. But in this case, both sides were our family. And we were a very close family. I used to go to my cousin's farm once every 3 weeks. So from a very young age, I watched this relationship deteriorate, but nobody said anything about it. There were always excuses. My uncle was on a distant field, so couldn't come back for his tea with us. I mean, despite the fact it was a tiny farm, it would take you about 3 minutes to walk from one end of it to another. I mean, they must have thought we were stupid, but not only was it a very nasty divorce, but my aunt stopped my grandmother from seeing her grandchildren for 15 years. So despite the fact that I saw my cousins all the time, my grandmother, who I was very close to, who lived in the same town as us, didn't see them for 15 years. And I saw firsthand how destructive that was. My cousins didn't see their father until shortly before he died, when they were probably in their 30s or 40s. So it really was one of the most bitter and nasty divorces ever. And I saw firsthand every angle on this. You know, I could see how my aunt was a difficult woman. I could see that my uncle was impossible. And I saw the people who suffered from this. And the most important thing to remember is nobody said one single word about it.
It's incredible, but it's not uncommon, is it? There is this sort of belief that if you just don't say anything, then children won't ask any questions or will just not realise it's happening in some weird way. How old were you when all this was going on, Andrew?
By the time the actual divorce came through, I was about 7, because one day I came home for lunch and my mother wasn't there. And later she told me that she was with my aunt getting the divorce. And as you can imagine, legal things take longer than you imagine at the courts. And so she was late and I was standing outside the door waiting for my lunch, so to speak. So I think, this probably went on for about 2 or 3 years before that. So I do remember the good times. I was really quite close to my uncle. And then I saw him about sort of 4 times after that.
So it sounds like it had a very big impact on you at quite a young age, but you were vividly aware and very aware of what was going on and had no voice to question or ask at that stage what was happening or why it was happening. It must have been incredibly confusing.
Yes, and you've got to bear in mind that I'm a very curious, inquisitive person. I'm a journalist, I'm a therapist. And I think that we become the things that we need to become. I don't know if I was a curious person because of all of this or whether I arrived in this world as a curious person. But the problem is I remember everything. Most people don't have very few memories from their young childhood. And, I could probably write 3 books on the topic.
So you have this experience at a very formative time, and then how does your life play out to leave you ending up as a therapist? Tell us that journey.
Well, my parents didn't talk about anything important either. Funny, I became a therapist and a broadcaster, and all I do all day, every day, is talk about emotions and feelings. So I went into radio, and I had a radio program where people used to phone in with their personal problems, and I had a panel of experts, including a relate counsellor, although in those days it was called the marriage guidance counsellor.
Yes.
And people said I was really rather good at it. It's just the host but it's 2 of the tasks of a therapist is, number 1, to draw people out. Well, that's what I would do. And then I would also summarize the advice of the experts. And actually summarizing what's been going on is another important therapist task. And so I thought, gosh, this is interesting. I think I would like to find out more about that. And slowly but surely, I did less and less journalism and more therapy. And here I am now doing 95% therapy and 5% journalism.
So you go from witnessing a divorce in the family at a young age to going into journalism, to training and to being a professional in the relationship space. What drew you to working with couples to improve relationships? How did that come about?
I think it's because I was fascinated in understanding relationships, because when people don't speak and you have to do nothing but read subtext all the time, you sort of want as many tools as you can possibly get. So I think that's unconsciously what drew me to it.
And let's talk a little bit then about how you help people. So describe the sorts of couples who come to you. Is there a type who will actively seek to improve relationships? And if so, do you see that those people, do they have healthier relationships before you intervene, or do they have healthier relationships because you intervene? Which way round is it?
A very interesting question. There was a time when everybody came to me because I'd written a book called I Love You, But I'm Not in Love with You. And so that is basically all I saw. And then I wrote another book called How Can I Ever Trust You Again, which was about infidelity. And that's all I saw. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I moved to Berlin and set up a practice there. I still have a practice in the UK. And I just saw people who needed help. And that was a wonderful change, because I was seeing the same issues again and again. Now people come generally because they're in a crisis in their relationship. They're asking, can we make this relationship work? And I try not to have that discussion. I find that actually an unhelpful discussion, because generally there's one person who thinks, yes, we can, and one person thinks, no, we can't. And they just have the same argument over and over again. what I work on, and I think is my main work, is helping people communicate better. Because if you're going to stay together, you're going to want to communicate better. And this is the weird thing. If you're going to split up, you're going to need to be able to communicate even better. Because if you can fight when you're both in front of each other in the kitchen, when you're doing it over text and there's possibly new partners involved, I promise you that's going to be even worse. So you never waste any time improving your communication, because you're going to have to be better communicating as an ex-couple as you do a loving couple. In fact, it's harder, because if you love somebody, you give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think that's if people take one thing away from this podcast, it's exactly that, isn't it? Practicing your communication skills and seeing a therapist to improve communication skills is a win-win, whether you stay together or whether you split up. Absolutely. And you're right. It is so much harder to be a good communicator when the sort of, I guess, the glue and the oil of a loving relationship has left it, and you're left as two separated parents potentially trying to work things out.
To hurt people. And sometimes that the divorce will bring up old wounds from the past. And sometimes we act out from our wounds. We're overwhelmed and we lash out, or we shut off. And lashing out and shutting off are two things best avoided if you want to improve communication.
Mm. Let's talk a little bit about improving communication then. What are some of the things that somebody listening who might be going through the relationship breakdown phase, what are some of the tips they could take away in terms of how to improve communication? And is it something you can do as a solo sort of engagement person, or do you need both of you involved in this?
Well, if you improve your communication, you're actually laying out a sort of a template, an example for your partner to follow. Now, they might not do it consciously, but unconsciously they will. If you race to the bottom and say, I'm going to behave worse, guess what you're doing? You're encouraging them to behave worse. And, it won't take you very long to get to screaming at each other. So the exercise that I always practice with people is a listening exercise. And it's sort of almost the thing we do from the very beginning. And it has various advantages. Number one, it slows down the communication, which is really important, because the quicker you're going, the more likely it is that you're going to misunderstand each other. It makes certain that you truly hear what the other person is saying, not what you imagine they're saying. And there can often be a difference between those two things. And it buys you a bit of time, because generally the worst communication happens when we're triggered. And I always say, it's a bit like a train leaving a station. Once you're triggered, it's like the guard blowing the whistle and the train goes, and you can't bring them back. Whereas if you can put a gap in between the trigger, the whistle blowing, then you can actually decide, do I want to leave this station or not? So you've actually got a moment to think and say, am I going to react to that, or am I not going to react to that? And, you might want to react to it and you can have a row, and that's fine. Sometimes a row can clear the air, and that's good. But you don't want to automatically do it. You want to have that moment, what I call the golden gap, where you can actually choose how you're going to behave rather than just doing the old programming.
Yes, it's the choice, isn't it? That's really empowering and important. And as you say, it's the difference between reacting and responding.
So if you could sort of say something slightly emotional to me, and I'm going to reflect back, and so I can actually show the technique.
So I'm sick and fed up of you always just coming in late after work and not helping me prep the dinner or sort the kids out. It's just selfish.
So what I'm hearing is you're sick and tired of me coming home late and not actually helping you with the children, and you feel that I'm being selfish. Is that right? So what I've done is I've literally just summarized. I've been looking in particular for the emotional words. And then I'm now going to say the 3 most loving words in the English language. And they're not I love you. Is there more? And the reason why is there more are the 3 most loving words in the English language is that at this precise moment, the last thing I want to hear is more of what you've just said. But because I love you and I want to make this relationship better, I'm going to say, is there more? Is there more?
Well, actually, yes, it's not just when you come home. I feel like I have to do everything around the house and you don't really contribute. I know you work hard and you have to go out and earn a living, but I have to work too. And I've got to do all of the childcare and everything around the house too.
So what you're saying is it's not just as far as coming home. You feel that you're doing everything around the house and you acknowledge the work that I do, but you have to work too. Is that right?
Yes.
Is there more? And so we go on. And what it actually does is it stops me immediately getting ready with my defense, which I can give you plenty of defense, but you've probably heard it before and we don't need it. And we keep going until you say, no, there isn't more. And then it's my turn. And then you would be summarizing. But even if your partner doesn't know this, to summarize rather than defend, because guess what defending does?
Well, it brings out my next attack, I presume,
Exactly.
doesn't it? And I didn't feel like doing that when you were saying it, because I was just, the fact that you were listening and reflecting it back to me was actually calming me down as well. So it was stopping the next attack coming.
Yeah. And what we need to get to the point is that you can accept the fact that your partner gets upset. We all get upset. And if you don't have to defend yourself, you just have to repeat back what they've said without editorializing. You don't actually say, but you're wrong about that. I do this, that, and the other. You just summarize it. It takes the sting out of it. It slows everything down. People always say it's not natural. And, my sort of response is thank goodness, because, natural conversation has got you through to see me. So let's try something else.
And that's really good because it's a technique that obviously strengthens the communication. And like you say, it's not predicated on wanting to get back together again. If we're talking to an audience where the listeners are people thinking about divorce or separation. So it's something you can use as part of your breakup journey, isn't it? It's something, whether you're separating, divorcing, whatever stage you're at, you can use it to improve the relationship if you're not at the point of, this is a decision I've made. But also if it is a decision that you've made or your partner has made, it's a very empowering technique. Just, being on the end of it there, it feels a really good way of being able to cope with some of that maelstrom of emotion.
Yeah, and you're not going to be so triggered yourself because you're just focusing on listening. And it's very difficult because, in fact, when you started getting emotional, I was thinking, oh my gosh, my adrenaline was beginning to run as well. And I just had something to focus on, which was, what did Kate say? That's all I've got to do. And, I think after this, we would be able to have a sensible conversation about, whatever it was. It might be a problem one of our daughters has got or something. But once we're both on the same page, it's much easier to find a solution for it.
What do you think are some of the common mistakes that couples make when they separate then? So obviously they take potentially poor communication into a relationship that's going to rely on good communication more than ever. So that's one big one. What are the other common mistakes or pitfalls?
Well, the number one is, let's get this over as quickly as possible because it hurts so much. You want to be in and out in 5 minutes if you possibly can. And the problem is, the quicker you try and do it, the less time, and it's normally one person who's actually seeking the divorce, the less time your partner has got to come to terms with it. And you think you're going to save pain now, but if you divorce badly, you could probably be still working through that bad divorce 5-10 years down the line. You could still be arguing about it at your grandchildren's christening, which I have to say would be a very sad outcome. And so there are no shortcuts. And in fact, every shortcut generally creates more problems further down the line. So, accept the fact that it's going to be painful. But here's the good part of it. There's gold in the problems. If you think of all the big fairy tales, the witches and the dragons always have gold. And so from this, you're going to learn a huge amount. It could be better communication. It could be learning about yourself. It could be a new relationship with your children. There's going to be some great things that are going to come out of it. But you can't skip the dragon or the witch. you've got to go into the dark room and face the music. And rushing through it just doesn't work. So that's the first one. I think the second one, and I hear this one from time to time, well, he'll just have to accept it when we're divorced. It's the sort of seeing divorce as the magic bullet that's going to solve the problems. You're just arguing over text messages now. It's not going to change the fundamentals in your relationship. You've still got to communicate with each other. So, divorce is not the solution.
No, it's just an outcome, isn't it? You're right. It's a very interesting way of looking at it, because I think sometimes people want an ending and want to kind of end it, celebrate the end of it, move on. But if you've got kids, you're always in each other's lives and will be for the rest of your lives. So it's really a new beginning, isn't it? A new way of relating and accepting that the old ways of doing things may have brought you to the point of the relationship breakdown. So there is still, it's annoying, but there's still work to be done, I guess, is what you're saying, isn't it?
Well, unfortunately, that's what life is like, that the work never ends. I'm just turning 66 and, I'm now thinking about all sorts of new things like, am I going to retire? How much work am I going to continue to do? I mean, there's always work to be done. So I'm sorry, but it's better to go into it with your eyes open. Divorce is not going to be a magic bullet. But, it could actually be the beginning of something that's going to be much better. But you've still got to do the work together. And the third one is what I call the switch-off technique. And both men and women can do this equally well. Sometimes women give up on their marriage, but rather than actually immediately seeking legal advice, they sort of wait until an important date comes around. So it might be when the youngest child goes off to university. That's a classic. And what often happens is they stop complaining because what's the point? I'm leaving in 3 years' time. And at this point, their partner thinks, hey, this is really wonderful. There's no complaints. Everything in the garden is rosy. And so it's not just a shock. They just can't believe that you want a divorce. And it's at this point that they start pulling out all the stops and they come and see me. But you left 3 years ago. And that makes for a very bitter divorce because the man thinks, I never got a chance to try. And the male version is just shutting your eyes and hoping it's not going to happen and not answering letters and all of those things. And you can't start a better new relationship by not talking to each other about anything important. It might seem like a technique that's going to keep your head above the mud, but it's only a temporary thing and it makes things worse.
What do you say to people then when they're in that situation where all of a sudden it's brought to their attention the relationship is in dire trouble, and one person says, look, I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore, and the other one begs them to go to therapy. Is that a recipe for disaster? Or should you go at that stage if you know in your own mind it's over? Or is there a conversation you need to have that says, well, I'll go, but on the basis I'm going to essentially end this well rather than try and reignite? Do you need to have that conversation before you go, or should you just not say anything and turn up and see what happens?
Well, I think a bit of expectation management is okay. If you've got a good therapist, they will give you both time to express yourself so both people feel heard. The person that says, this relationship is over and it's too late and I just haven't got anything left to give. And the person saying, but I'd like to make all of these changes. And it's really important that both sides get heard. And, it doesn't take that long to actually hear each other out. And then to reach the point when both of you have been heard to actually say, well, what are we going to do? And generally you tend to find the person who's been trying to save the relationship says, well, I can't make you stay. I hear that you want to leave. And, they begin to reach a point where the shock is over and you can only spend a certain amount of time on the ground groveling without actually feeling that you've got no self-respect left. And that comes back and you sort of say, well, so what are we going to do? And I think this is the best kind of outcome, because it's actually at this point that it's a mutual decision rather than one that's being imposed by one person on the other person. And, generally, this doesn't take years. I don't have clients that I've kept going around in those circles for weeks and weeks and weeks. The great advantage of therapy is you come each week and you are faced with the same questions again. What are we going to do? What are we going to do differently? And if one person is acting differently, but it's not enough for the other person, then we begin to reach that point where the person who's trying to do things differently realizes it, accepts it, and thinks, what are we going to do next with our relationship?
It kind of comes down to what you were saying before with your lovely train analogy, pulling out the station. It's giving you that time, isn't it, to adjust to the eventuality of the train leaving the station, but you're giving yourself the time with therapy to come to terms with that in a contained way that doesn't mean you have to go and say or do things in the real world that might have very big consequences for the way you divorce, the impact that has on your children, the financial settlement you might come to. And that seems to me the really critical factor.
And the reality is that the train doesn't come back into the station again. We've never seen the whistle blow and the train stop and then reverse back in again. But we sort of think that we can do that with our relationship. And it's much better to get everything sorted before the train leaves.
Let's talk a little bit about coping mechanisms. How can we sort of break out of patterns, unhelpful coping mechanism patterns that we might have when we're separating or divorcing? So, you described some of the sort of common mistakes people make. And I guess some of the desire to rush, for example, is a coping mechanism on one level, isn't it? Let's just keep the pain as quickly, pull the plaster off, we say. Let's just pull the plaster off and it will all be okay. So how can we break out of those patterns?
Did you know my mother by any chance?
I hear lots of people say that to me.
Well, first of all, I think you need to be kind to yourself because our coping mechanisms started when we were very small, possibly even before we even had words. So these things go all the way back. So be kind to yourself. If you are somebody that blows up or withdraws, you are going to do that because you're only human and you've been doing it for the last ... years. But you can actually make the cycle quicker. So, instead of not speaking for 3 days, you could have 3 minutes or 3 hours. And, instead of blowing up and then saying, you deserved it, apologize and come back, when you've calmed down, say, I'm terribly sorry, that wasn't helpful. And I know that upset you. Can we start again, please? So I think the key one is to actually understand what your coping strategy is and accept that it's actually quite a good strategy. It's sort of kept you safe and got you to here. So, that it's not all bad. It's just we need to do something differently. I mean, it's the most important question I ask. Well, I have 2 questions I ask all the time. One is, what can I do differently? And the second one is, what is this feeling trying to tell me? So it's probably telling you something important. If you're angry, there's probably a very good reason for it. So let's find out what it is rather than just poof.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it's knowing yourself as part of that therapeutic step and understanding what, like you say, your own coping mechanisms, but not being, well, there's a tendency, I think, in this space that we exist in is to be critical all the time of poor behavior or poor decision making when we're trying to separate and divorce and do things in a kinder way. But actually, I think what you're saying is, yeah, we might be doing things wrong, but there's obviously being a benefit to that behavior to this point because it's got us to this point. And if we can see and be kinder to ourselves, it gives us more chance to reflect and spot these patterns and then ask that very important question, what could I do differently? Because that's such a powerful question, ultimately. It really is.
And what's so powerful is it's in your control. It's not, what could my partner do differently?
Yes.
Well, I could think of 300 things.
Which is where we all go to, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
But what could I do differently? Oh, and by the way, giving up caring is not one of the acceptable answers because you can't do that.
No, it's got to be something realistic. Do you think there is it sounds a bit trite, but almost a blueprint for a kinder separation?
Well, I think your idea of one lawyer representing both parties is a brilliant one, because I've had clients that have used this kind of process and it is kinder. So I think that one of the important things is to work together as a team to think about what you're going to do legally, rather than going immediately to two different lawyers who then are going to fight with each other, because it's what lawyers do. It's a bit like, complaining that dogs scratch their backsides. That's just the life of a dog. And from having worked a lot with lawyers as clients, I used to work in central London in the middle of just by the Old Bailey. So most of my clients were lawyers. And most of the time I spent trying to get them to come from their heart rather than from their head. So you've got two people who are not necessarily incredibly emotionally intelligent, and you're getting them to try and solve your difficult emotional problems. Don't think it's going to work.
No, they make expensive therapists as well, don't they? I think you're right. I think trying to work through this together, particularly when you've got children and you're going to be in each other's lives, is absolutely key. And I guess for me as well, it's always very fulfilling when we help people when they have had some kind of therapy and been through the therapeutic process, because it has given them a chance to say some of the things that they need to say in order to clear that headspace to be able to then move on to make some more practical decisions about how they're going to split property or money and how they're going to co-parent children. So I think the prep, it's all in the prep for me. It's having a good therapeutic relationship and being able to discuss first before moving on to sorting out the practicalities. And I guess that comes back to your point about not rushing it. This can be a long old process.
Yeah, it's a bit like winding up an estate. You can try and rush it, or you can take your time, because there's a lot of painful and good memories to process as well. I mean, there's lots of good things that came out of this relationship, and you want to be able to hold those as well as the things that you don't like.
Exactly. Any final tips if we've got people listening and they're going through a separation? How do they make it kinder? What sort of things can they do?
I think I've got two pieces of advice. If you're stuck, always go deeper. So actually try and understand, why is this particular thing so painful to me? What does it symbolize? What does it represent? So you actually understand. And sometimes that helps you let go. And other times it says, this is something I've really got to hold on to. And the same with your partner, to try and actually understand why this is a block for him or her as well. So generally, if you're fighting over something, let's take a step back and say, what does this actually symbolize to each of us? We're talking about money, but what does money mean to each of us? And the other thing I would say is that I'm doing this men's retreat, which is in Berlin, or just outside Berlin in the woods with a beautiful lake to swim in, at the end of September of 2025. And it's a very good place to do a reset, because divorce makes you question absolutely everything. Where have I been and where am I going? And to actually be able to step out of your everyday world, actually for men with other men, rather than taking their problems to women, which can very easily get you into a new relationship before you've hardly left the last one. And that complicates the divorce as well, because suddenly there's another person with an emotional impact of it, and who's pulling and pushing and keep do it. Whereas other men having your back doesn't create those problems. And it's a really useful thing to do to get some good male friends, to get better male friends. There's one thing that most men need, and particularly after a divorce, is more friends. And so this teaches the skills about how to make friends, because often it was your friends or your wife's friends' husbands. And that's probably not going to work in the future.
But they're very good tips. Thank you. And where can people find out a bit more about you and what you do, Andrew?
So my website is the sort of the gateway to everything I do. It's www.andrewgmarshall.com. I have a podcast which looks at how to make your life more meaningful and actually how we tick and work. So I do quite a few straightforward relationship ones, but we look deeper at things like anger or how to create more empathy. We look at how to deal with the big transitions in your life, how to live a more authentic life. Because if you're going to start a new life, which is what divorce is all about, let's make it one where you're living for yourself, not trying to do what your parents want you to do. And so that's the podcast. I have a team of people who can help you with communication if you'd like to see one of them. And I also have a video course of my best relationship tools. So one of the thing that I gave you was one of my best relationship tools. And I have a whole load of others that you can work through together or on your own on the internet.
What a fabulous set of resources. Thank you. We'll make all of those things signpostable in the show notes so that people can find those and find their way to the help and support that you offer. Thank you very much for your time today, Andrew. It's been an absolute delight talking to you. Some really useful and practical tips and advice. If you're looking for more general separation and co-parenting support, you can also visit amicable.co.uk, where you can explore our resources or book a free advice consultation. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, you'd like to hear more of the Divorce Podcast, you can subscribe for updates by visiting thedivorcepodcast.com, or you can find us on your favourite listening platforms. Finally, we'd love to know how we can help more. So please share your questions on divorce, separation and co-parenting with us at hello@amicable.co.uk. You never know, they might be the topic of the next episode. Thank you for listening.